are Vineyard.
Somos Viña.
We are Vineyard.
Eventually, not long after that, we get married. And long story short, because of how all of that worked, Linnea's mom gave her life to Jesus.
Wow.
And we repented for how we had been living. And so we got married when we were 19 and 17 years of age.
Wow. That's incredible.
Yeah, Linnea graduated a year early. She needed one credit. She went to summer school. But all of that to say, one of the things in my story is I fully understand how God continues to work in broken people.
Yes.
The story of my family,
Yeah.
story of our coming to Jesus.
Yes.
But one of the things that I've recognized in the story is that God uses broken people, but he doesn't just use them. He also works through them.
Welcome to the We Are Vineyard podcast, conversations to help us grow with Jesus and each other. In today's episode, our host Jay Pathak talks with Paul Watson. Paul is the founding pastor of the Downtown Vineyard Church in Grand Junction, Colorado, and serves Vineyard USA as the regional leader for the mountain region. Let's listen in.
All right. Well, Paul, thanks for joining me for our podcast. This is fun.
This is fun.
You said you've listened to almost all of them, which is quite a feat. There are many hours. Where is your preferred listening podcast zone? Is it like working out? Is it in the car? Is it?
It's Fridays as I do lawn work.
Do what?
So, lawn work is I mow my lawn.
Oh, lawn work. Okay, so you're out like mowing, weeding, just listening to podcasts.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Well, that fits.
Friday's my day off, and Linnea is a teacher. She's a principal.
Right.
And so she's at work. And one of the things I try to do on Fridays is make sure that we get everything taken care of so that we get the weekend together. Because as you know, pastors and teachers, she works for the school district.
Yes.
So she works Monday through Friday. I work Sunday through Thursday.
Yes.
And so basically we get Saturday together. So I just tuck my head down on my day off and take care of all of our house stuff and listen to podcasts.
Wow. And that alone might be worth the price of admission for people listening. That alone, I mean, when Danielle and I talk about it, because we've really tried hard to practice Sabbath, like one full day, like a night to a night. And the thing that I think was most like confusing as we tried to do that was the realization that we had to prep what amounted to a whole day's worth of work.
Yeah.
In order to actually have a day free.
Yeah, and that is exactly what we're trying to get to. So Linnea comes home, she gets home between about 4:30. I try to have everything done. So for 24 hours, we get to do everything but work.
Dude.
And Sabbath, and sometimes that's family outings, sometimes that's whatever.
Right.
But we've had to get really super intentional about that.
Dude, it's so good. That's so good. Yeah, this is the podcast now that one spouse is sending the other spouse. They're just like, listen, all you have to do is listen to the first 5 minutes of this. You ever get those? You're a way better husband than me.
All the housework for me is what somebody just heard.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. You ever get I get those. Danielle's like, I think you should really listen to this. You're going to like this. Specifically these 4 minutes. If you can just zoom right to, and I'm like, this is.
I'm in trouble.
I need to learn something, it turns out. Okay, well, Paul, let's start where all good stories begin, which is where you were born and where you grew up.
Oh, shoot. I mean, for everybody, that's a story, right? I mean,
it
most
is.
People, like that's the foundational story. I grew up, I always say this, I always say we were gypsies, and people are like, you were gypsies? They think we were gypsies or military.
Right.
And I say we were gypsies. I was born in Moab, Utah. I was born in Moab, Utah. My dad was a oil field worker. My whole life, my mom was a waitress. And so we were super blue collar. We're just a blue collar family. And somewhere in that, before I was born, a little lady next door came over because my mom had 5 kids and asked if she could take them to church. And my mom wasn't willing to sacrifice all of us at the same time, so she sacrificed my oldest sister. And so my parents gave their life to Jesus before I was born, but I was born in Utah. Shortly after I was born in Utah, we just started moving, and we moved all over the place. And some days we would go sometimes we'd get signed up for school and we would come back that next day or that same day, and there'd be another moving truck in the driveway. And my parents, literally, we moved all over the place. And so that was kind of my story, is that by the time I was in third grade, we had moved to Grand Junction, and I had been in 13 different schools.
Wow. Okay, so back up to the woman taking the 5 kids to church. So your mom's like, yeah, you can take the oldest here, and then slowly add another one, or add them all at once. And then finally your mom's like, well, I guess I should probably go.
Yeah, it was real close to that. It was this little old lady who lived next door. My mom said, you can take Susan, my oldest sister. And then the lady came back and said, well, here's how it works. She needs to learn this memory verse this week. And if she learns this memory verse, then when she gets back and she recites it, she gets candy, right? Like, I love it. Very, very, very 1960s.
Yeah. I don't know. Maybe we should do that for people in our churches. like
it worked. And so my mom starts helping my little sister memorize scripture, and the scripture starts coming alive inside her. And she starts going, oh, that's true. That's true. That's true.
Right.
Then the little lady took my 2 oldest sisters. I'm the youngest of 5. It goes 2 girls, 3 boys. And so then it was both my sisters were going. And finally she asked if she could take all of us kids. And my mom said, well, I'll just go with you. And so my mom went. And my mom always wanted to give her life to Jesus. Always. Since she was a little girl. She wasn't raised in church, but she just had this thing. She had friends growing up that had given their lives, that were Christian families. And she always had this great desire to know God, to know Jesus. And so she gave her life to Jesus before I was born. But I was basically raised in church. But I also, in the midst of being raised in church, we were also very, 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 we just moved. But my dad would find a new job, and he would leave his job, and we would move. And we moved all over. We moved to Oregon. We moved to Vegas. We moved to Texas, all over Texas, Utah. Yeah, we were just a family that moved.
Dude, and does that old woman have any idea what happened to you guys?
I wondered that, actually, but the answer to that is, I know that the answer is yes, because we all started going to church there, and then my dad gave his life to Jesus. My dad gave his life to Jesus. It was a couple years later, but that little lady brought my whole family into the church, into relationship with Jesus. And then when my dad got saved, he got radically saved, and that little church exploded because my dad was very evangelistic.
Really?
Yeah.
What city is that in? That's in Junction?
It was in Moab, Utah.
Moab. So that's all back in Moab.
Yeah.
So he comes to Christ and is like, I'm bringing everybody to this thing.
Everybody.
Wow.
That little church went very, 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 it was just a little tiny Assemblies of God church. And so I was raised Assemblies of God. And my dad, when he gave his life to Jesus, he told everybody. He said, why wouldn't I tell everybody? He told everybody.
Dude, talk about building a church growth plan. Okay, here's our church growth plan. We're going to have an old lady invite her neighbors to church. That's our big church growth plan.
That's our plan.
And hopefully we'll see someone come to Christ who just has a ton of friends. That's kind of our key thing. Yeah. But it's amazing how many times that's really what it is. Like, one invitation has a huge impact, then everybody's in, and we're off and running. I mean,
but we come up with all these plans on how we're going to grow our churches,
right?
How we're supposed to reach people and catch people and disciple people. And literally, one little lady looks at a lady who lives next door who's tired, who has lots of kids, and just says, I'm just going to invite her.
I'm going to just help you out. Yeah.
Yep, I'll help you out.
And who knows if it was even like fervently evangelistic. It could just be like, I feel bad for you. Like, let me help you.
That's what it was.
Let me just free up like part of one day in the morning for you. That's kind of
my mom was she doesn't know anybody that goes to church, but she has this deep longing in her soul that she's always wanted to be a part of a church.
And who would even know that? Like, how would anyone know? Yeah. That's mind-blowing. I love it. I just love it. I mean, anyway, there's too much to think about there, but it is realizing how much of the work is empowering people to just do a few small things that cares for people around them, and then being the kind of church that people want to bring people along to. There's still something about that church that she's like, I think it'd be good for me to bring people to this.
Yeah. And it wasn't fancy either. It wasn't a fancy church. It wasn't a mega church. It's 1963 or something like that. When my mom and dad started going to church. I'm not born till 65 or 68.
So great.
And so it's 5 years before I'm born. So I'm born into a family of believers, but they weren't always believers. My mom and dad we weren't believers when they got married. They weren't believers for many, many years. And the church that they went to they weren't killing it. You wouldn't look at it, drive down the road and go, that church is killing it, man. Right. Look at all the people in the parking lot. There weren't that many people in the parking lot.
Yep.
They didn't have a big draw. They were just a small little church in Moab, Utah.
Yeah.
And a little lady who she was, her husband had died, and she just went to church on Sundays and invited my mom to come along.
Dude, it's so good. Okay. So now we're roaming all over, chasing work wherever we can find it. And so as Paul's growing up, what kind of kid are you? Are you kind of like geeky academic kid? Are you kind of like tough guy, bully? Are you sort of like sad loner? What, because there's all kinds of different people.
That's the kind of kid just sad and lonely.
Well, there is, right? I mean, actually, I'm not super far from that category when I was a kid, but like, what kind of a kid are you? Because now you're in church, so that's just like what you do.
So I grew up. I'm the youngest of 5. I'm the youngest of 3 brothers, 2 sisters, and then 3 brothers. I'm athletic. And I'm competitive because I'm the youngest of brothers. But I'm also, our parents, we were unparented. And so there's also this other place that plays into my story where we're just wild, just wild kids. And we finally moved to Grand Junction, and we have this little title, we're the Watson Boys. And the Watson Boys, that wasn't necessarily a good acronym or a good name. Right. You're one of the Watson Boys. Right. And because a lot came with that story, but I'm young, I'm athletic, I'm super competitive. The kids in the neighborhood, even though my brothers were quite a bit older than me, they would come knock on the door and ask, hey, can Paul play? Because they were playing football we lived across the street from this middle school. And so all the middle school boys would come ask this little elementary kid, not even an elementary kid, I think I was in 2nd or 3rd grade, if I could play. Because I was pretty competitive. And that was my story.
So you're like sports guy. So I'm playing football, baseball, whatever.
Yeah. If you can win at it or lose at it, and if it has a ball, I like it. We'll be eating breakfast and everybody will be eating cereal, and nobody knows that I am competing to see who gets done first. Yeah. Competition runs deeply through my bones.
So don't even need a ball, really. You just need a way
I'm measuring whether anybody else is measuring or not.
That's perfect. I love it. That's good. I have some of those tendencies myself, so I can recognize those. So I know, because I know your story, but I know that church was instrumental, like youth groups, youth leaders. So like you're kind of jock version, but then you're also kind of trying to figure out a life with Jesus, and youth pastors and youth leaders are instrumental. Talk about that, because I know that's a key part of your story.
Yeah, so we moved to Grand Junction when I'm a kid, and my dad moved us. We were living in Price, Utah. Later on, again, we moved all over the place.
Right.
And my dad looked up, and we were living in Utah, and my dad did not want my sisters marrying people that didn't come out of a good church. And my sisters were beautiful, and so we used to travel. My mom said, well, there's a good church in Grand Junction. And so we used to travel 2.5 hours every Sunday to go to church from Price to Grand Junction, because we didn't have any good churches in Price at that time. There probably are now. But at that time, they just didn't connect with one. And she was like, there's this great church with a great reputation. And so on Sundays, we would load our family car up. We're blue collar. My dad's working in a coal mine at that time. My mom works at a restaurant. And Sundays, we would load the car up. We'd drive 2.5 hours to Grand Junction, go to church, and then go home. And that was Sundays. And finally, my mom said, there's a coal mine in Grand Junction. Maybe you could get a job there. And my dad did. And so we moved to Grand Junction so that my brothers and sisters and I could be raised in a good church. And so from the time I was, my fondest memories were of that church. But I was also, again, I was super wild. And so even though we loved Jesus, and even though we were unparented, my dad worked nights, and my mom had to be to work she had to be up at 4 a.m. She had to be at the restaurant by 5. So she was in bed by 8. My dad went to work at 8 p.m. and we just ran around unparented. Parents were tired. And so I got kicked out of that church 3 times.
Okay, wait. I've heard this bit. I've never stopped and asked, give me like one of the reasons. Like you don't give me one of the, because it's usually an incident, right? It's not like I don't know, you're hard to be around, you're out. It's like something happens. Like let me just say, you can't beat kids up in the parking lot and get to come back next Sunday very often. And so there's this kid that I didn't like, and he was cocky. And so when he comes out of church, I just jumped him and just pummeled him. And I think I was supposed to be in the Christmas, they did this Christmas kind of play pageant thing. Yeah, right.
And so we thought it'd be funny if we came to church not completely sober. And so that was kind of, so we were going to church, but we were wild kids. And
right.
And that was my home too, you know what I'm saying? And so there's this point in time where the senior pastor's wife, she pulled me in and just said, hey, listen, Paul, you can't, the things you're doing at church, you just don't do those at church, and you can't come back until we have a conversation with your mom and dad.
Right.
And I was like, okay. I wasn't going to tell my mom and dad. I was like, okay. And so it took me years later, because here's the irony. I am now the church I pastor is in the building I grew up in.
Wow.
So years later, it was an Assemblies of God church. They asked us if we wanted to buy it as we grew. And so my office, my current office is the office that I got kicked out of when I was 15. Like where my desk sits and where I got kicked, the seat I was sitting in when I was 15 is like right there. It's the same office. And so it was years later that I realized that after Donna had kicked me out of church, the senior pastor's wife, we got a new youth pastor, and he called me up out of the blue and said, hey, I heard you're a kid that should be in our youth group. And it took me years to recognize that it was Donna who went to him and said, hey, listen, I haven't seen Paul around for a while. Why don't you reach out to him?
Wow.
And so that same youth pastor reached out to me. I told him no. I'm like, no, I'm good, man. I'm done with the church thing. I'm good. And he goes, no, just come by. He was an all-star football player that had graduated from the same high school that I was playing football for. And so I gave him a chance, not because of Jesus. I gave him a chance because he was an all-star football player, baseball player, basketball player. He was a sports guy. And he said, I think you and I would really click. And so I gave him a chance. And from the moment he met me, he told me, here's the deal. I am going to call you to give your life to Jesus. If you and I become friends, if you start coming back to youth group, I am going to, every time we're around each other, I'm going to invite you to give your life to Jesus. And so he did. Every time I'd walk up the youth group stairs and he'd say, hey, Watson, you going to give your life to Jesus today? Wow. And I would yell back across the youth room, hey, not today, Northrop, not today. And so this little thing played out, I don't know, maybe it was most of my sophomore year. And I was throwing a party at the end of the year this spring. I had a buddy at a swimming pool, and I was running people back and forth to class. Would like pick them up, and then I'd take them to the house, and we had this party that was going all day long. And then when they needed to go back because they had tests to take, I'll take them back to school. And so I was making these party runs, and I literally pulled up to this stoplight, and the Holy Spirit, because I grew up in church, I was in church at the time. And the Holy Spirit just literally said, how's things going for you? You've not submitted your life to me. How are you doing at running your life? And I didn't even know I was empty. I mean, honest to God, I didn't know I was empty. And I burst crying like a baby in my car. And that light turned red 3 different times. I couldn't move. I couldn't see to drive. Yeah. And the Holy Spirit came, and I had a powerful, powerful encounter with God in my car. And I gave my life to Jesus in my car, and everything changed. Wow. And much like my dad, our little youth group was a little youth group, 25 kids. And when I gave my life to Jesus, I started inviting everybody to church. And our little youth group went from 25 kids to 125 kids in a few weeks. Wow.
Dude. So there's so many things that are encouraging about that, in that we all know that youth group kid. You know, there's a kid or two roaming around the edges of every church. Yeah. And they kind of keep showing up, but something's not lined up right, and it doesn't seem to work. And what I mean, the encouragement I get is that it turns out God can just break in however he wants. Like
however he wants.
Because like that, there isn't like a nice straight line there. There isn't, and so I was praying, and then it just happens. Like it's like it's like a random day. But part of what helped was you were kept in the atmosphere. You're like in the world of it somehow.
Yeah.
So that when the penny drops, you can move forward. That's a really big deal. That's really cool.
And here's what I wasn't processing at the time, right? I'm going to church. My house, my dad gave his life to Jesus. My mom gave her life to Jesus. Jesus didn't heal my home.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know how else to say that.
Yeah.
I understand a lot about Jesus today. One of the things that I learned about Jesus was that Jesus doesn't always heal brokenness.
Yeah.
So my mom and dad loved Jesus, but my dad was really violent.
Yeah.
My home was really not safe. And so church for me, I couldn't have even put language to this as a kid. Church for me was a place where I could go where I was safe.
Yeah.
I had friends, and it was safe. People loved me at church.
Yeah.
And so even though we were wild and we were partying and that kind of thing, the environment in church for me kept me connected. And it did so because I knew my mom and dad loved Jesus. Yeah. But they didn't know how to love each other very well.
Right.
And my house was really, my dad was really angry. And there was a lot of anger that, like when you came home, 3:30 was a hard time for me to walk through the doors. And so church for me, when I look back now, there's a place that it was a space of safety.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's, on this other side of the curtain, it's helpful to notice how many folks are probably in our churches in that kind of scenario, right? They're like, wow, this is just a place that I know nobody's going to yell at me. People are generally kind. It feels relaxed in a way that I don't feel when I'm at home. Those things are not small things. Those are a big deal. And too often as pastors, we're like, man, this person doesn't even come to a small group, or they're not serving, or they don't give it. They're just like showing up, just kind of milling around here. Well, it turns out that's a big deal, that they're in the atmosphere. There's an opportunity for them to experience more, but it's respite. It's, it's respite. It's a place that they can relax in a way that they might not experience. Yeah. It's a big deal.
It's a place where for me, my home was crazy, and church was sane.
Yeah.
It was, I now know things that I didn't know then, but, the people were nice. The people seemed like they were genuinely happy to see me. They wanted me around. I would run the halls, and, people I didn't even know were kind to me.
Yeah.
And so that just Donna reaching back out, even though she was the one that said, hey, we don't do this. You can't come to church if you're going to do these things, which was the right thing to do.
Right.
Right. You don't get to go to church and beat kids up, and you don't get to come to church 15, 16 years of age intoxicated. Like, those are things that we just don't put a stamp of approval on.
Yeah. We're not going to be able to keep doing it like this. That's right. Yep.
And so then for her to have this new guy come in and her to say, hey, here's a list of 2 or 3 kids that I think you should chase. And I was on that list. And I had given my life to Jesus. Another crazy story is that when I was 10, because I'm in the church system, right? So my mom and dad, I'm going to church camps. I'm going to church events. I'm doing the church stuff. My parents really do love Jesus. They struggled to love each other maybe, but they loved Jesus. They both individually loved Jesus. And so I'm 12 years of age, and I'm up at a church camp. We've done some things where we shouldn't have done again. And my buddy feels tons of conviction. And he goes, I'm going to go turn us in. And I looked at him and said, you're going to go turn us in? Like, they're going to kick us out of camp. And he goes, yeah, I'm going down front, man. I'm going to go confess. And I'm like, I'm not. And so I leave the auditorium. He goes down to get prayer and confess and do all the stuff. And I'm literally hiding around this campfire. I'm 12. I'm trying to hide amongst all the other kids so they don't find me. And this youth pastor says, hey, I want everybody to close your eyes. And I want you to ask the Lord what he would have you do with your life. Like, that's a pretty big thing to ask kids.
Yeah.
And I'm 12. I close my eyes because I play the game, and I think to myself, okay, dude, I'm 12. Like,
I don't know. Right.
No.
Who cares? Right.
And I close my eyes and I hear an audible voice say, I have called you to these. And I knew in that moment that God had called me into ministry. Wow. I have called you to these. You are to win these. And I knew exactly what it meant. And I gave my life to Jesus sort of at the time. I acknowledged, even though I would have a few more years of doing silly things, I knew that God had called me, and I had a call on my life for ministry. And that was unbelievably powerful. So I'm having, as much as I'm running for God, or maybe even, I wouldn't, maybe not, just saying, I just didn't know how to make the connection, right? I like, we all think that everybody knows how to make the connection. It wasn't, there was a period in my time where I can say that I was running, but there was a period in my time where I just didn't know how to make the connection.
Yeah.
But I knew, I have never wondered what I was going to do with my life. From that camp forward, I knew that God called me. And it was when I was 17 that I submitted my life to Jesus.
Wow.
In my car on that spring break.
Wow.
Party trip.
Dude. Okay. So now things are getting lined up. As you're graduating, are you thinking, I'm going into ministry? Or are you like, no, I'm going to go do some other kind of work?
Well, so it's yes and no. Yes.
Right.
So when I'm I'm a wild kid. My GPA is really bad, like crazy bad. Like it's like a 1.6 or something like that. I'm just barely getting out of high school.
Right.
But I was a pretty good athlete. And my girlfriend, who was my girlfriend from middle school on, Linnea and I dated all the way from middle school. She was a 4.0 GPA. She was a who's who All-American. And so we knew she could go to pretty much any school she wanted to.
Right.
And so we were dating, and she was a year behind me. And we were thinking, so I wanted to impress her. So I had put off some places to go to school. And I had got picked up by Evangel Bible College, the Assemblies of God school. I was going to play football for Evangel, got my acceptance letter. So I was super excited to tell her.
Yeah.
One morning, I called her and said, hey, I got some good news to tell you. She said, I've got some news to tell you too. And so we meet at the locker the very next morning because she's like, I want to tell you face to face. And I said, good, because I want to tell you face to face. And she goes, you go first. And I said, no, you go first. And I wasn't being polite. I thought there's just no news that she was going to share with me that was going to be more impressive than the news I was going to share with her.
Right. Yeah. Hey, I'm going to college, believe it or not. Right. Yeah.
Yeah. And so she looks at me and she goes, I'm pregnant. And so we've given our lives to Jesus. We are like, our youth group is going crazy. It's grown. Everybody's looking at me saying, hey, you're going to be a pastor. You're going to be a youth pastor. And we find out that Linnea is pregnant my senior year.
Wow.
Just before we graduate. And she goes, what do you have to tell me? And I said, I don't have anything to tell you. And I said, but we do probably have some things we probably should talk about. And so we walk down the hall from my locker. And as I go around a trash can, I reach in my back pocket and I take that acceptance letter and I throw it in the trash. And I knew that moment, that conversation, my whole life had changed.
Yeah.
And that I wasn't going to Bible college, that I was going to have to figure out how to take care of Linnea. And so we made a plan to get married. And we thought we'd share that enthusiastic plan with her mother and her father and my
They'd
mom
just be
and dad.
So excited, right? Yeah.
Ecstatic about it. And that's really not how it went at all.
That's so weird. Yeah. Who would have guessed?
And so, but there was this growing up Assemblies of God. Whenever a kid, like I went all in, right, and started inviting all my friends, and our church youth group took off.
Right.
And Derry was a phenomenal youth pastor, so it's not a one-man show. I mean, lots of kids. We gave our lives to Jesus.
Yeah.
But there was still stuff that needed to be taken care of. But when you do that, everybody starts telling you, you're going to be a pastor, you're going to be a pastor, you're going to be a pastor. I can see the anointing on you. I see the call of God on you. And in reality, that was true, right? But there was still a lot of brokenness that we were going through.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There's so much interesting stuff there. So you're called, but now you're like, we got to work. I just got to take care of Linnea. We got to figure this out. And eventually you do get married. I mean, maybe not immediately, but eventually.
Well, we tell her parents, and 3 days before I graduate, Linnea calls me and says, hey, my mom just told me that she's moving me to Washington, D.C. That's where Linnea's stepdad was working. And she says, we're moving to Washington, D.C. So Linnea's mom now is trying to get her away from me.
Right.
And we're believers. And I literally I said, let's pray about it. Let's pray about it. We know that we are in sin. Let's pray that God could work this out. We pray about it. We hang up the phone. I take a step away from the phone and I look up. I'm now 18, right? It's my senior year. I've turned 18. I look up to the heavens and I just go, hey, God, you got to do something.
Yeah.
From the time I hang up the phone to the time I say that prayer is maybe 10 seconds.
Yeah.
The phone rings. I pick it up. And I think it's Linnea because this is back in the day. I just thought she called me back.
She maybe forgot something. Yeah.
And so I don't say hello. I just say, did you forget to tell me something?
Yeah.
On the other end of the phone, I hear this voice that says, hey, is this Paul Watson? I said, yeah. It says, this is Andy McKinley. Andy McKinley was my best friend in 9th grade. 8th to 9th grade. They moved to Denver. His dad had a business.
Huh.
He said, hey, I just got out of a family meeting, and my dad said we are moving to Washington, D.C., and we can take one person to work the family business. Would you like to go? And I say, when do I have to be there? And he says, we got to be in D.C. in 10 days, which is the exact timeline that Linnea is going to be in D.C.
Wow.
I call her back and say, hey, I got a job in Washington, D.C., and we're going to be moving to Washington, D.C. I got to be there in 10 days. Her mother's again ecstatic, super, super ecstatic.
Exactly.
And these two families, one from Denver and one from Grand Junction, moved to Washington, D.C. on the exact same day and buy houses on the same green belt, where Linnea and I were able to walk to each other's houses and keep our relationship alive. And it was at that point, Linnea's mom at that point wasn't a believer. And she literally, because of that, she said, I think God's at work, and we need to figure out how we can make your relationship work.
Wow.
And so eventually, not long after that, we get married. And long story short, because of kind of how all of that worked, Linnea's mom gave her life to Jesus.
Wow.
And we repented for how we'd been living. And so we got married when we were 19 and 17 years of age.
Wow. That's incredible.
Linnea graduated a year early. She needed one credit. She went to summer school. She graduated a year early. But all of that to say, one of the things in my story is I fully understand how God continues to work in broken people.
Yes.
The story of my family, story of our coming to Jesus.
Yes.
But one of the things that I've recognized in the story is that God uses broken people, but he doesn't just use them. He also works through them.
Yep. That's right. That's exactly right. And does so when they maybe aren't even like participating, like there's one thing when you're actively trying to work with God. There's another thing when you're actively working against him. But then it's usually something in between. I don't know. I'm just doing this. I'm just doing what's in front of me. But then you can look back and go,
oh yeah,
even in that, God was doing things, preparing me or putting different kinds of skills or gifts into my life that I didn't realize would bear fruit later. Okay, so now you're married. Zoom forward. How do you end up actually like, okay, I guess I'm going to be working in a church? How does that even happen?
Well, even that, because of my background, my background, I thought that I eliminated the call of God in my life because in the church that I grew up in, there were certain things that you couldn't do. If you did these things, you couldn't do ministry.
Yeah, you're out. Yep.
And so there's kind of two things going on. I can feel God, like the call of God in my life was heavy in the sense that it felt like that's all I wanted. I wanted to respond to it. And so there was this thing going on between me and the Lord. And I'm like, Lord, why would you put a call on my life that I have effectively ruined?
Yeah.
And then once I ruin it, why would you not take the burden of the call off of me?
Yeah. Get this off me. Right. Totally.
That's a cruel joke that I've got a call, but I cannot participate in it because of the history that I've gone through.
Yeah, the other stuff. Right. I'm disqualified, and yet I still want to do this. So now what? What do I do? Right.
And so I'm literally one Thanksgiving, I'm washing dishes. My whole family is together. My brothers, my sisters, my mom, my dad, and we're living in Denver now, and they're all out participating and they're sledding. And I said, no, I'll just do dishes. And I'm literally, what I'm doing is I'm hiding from them because my heart is so heavy. And I'm sitting there doing those dishes, and the Lord, another sweet moment. And I just said, God, this isn't fair. Why would you put a call on my life and not make a way? And for me, the way was I wasn't going to Bible school because I was going to raise my family. And the Lord just simply asked me this question. He says, Paul, which one of my disciples went to Bible school? And And it was just a moment for me of realizing that all the things that we think we have to do for God to use us, God makes the way. We don't make the way.
Yeah.
God chooses the way. God makes the way. And so it was in this process when we first started. The very first time we walked into a vineyard was the Denver Vineyard.
Mm-hmm.
It was 1987, and I had been going maybe 3 weeks. And in this moment, this guy comes over to me and he just kind of said, "Hey man, I've been watching you. I think you might be really good working with our kids." I'm young. I'm in my 20s. I'm 19, 20 years of age. Of course, that's kind of the prime person you kind of look for.
Yeah.
Athletic, all of those things. And he looks at me and goes, "You should work with our kids." And I literally look at him and I go, "No, dude, I shouldn't work with your kids." And he says, "Give me a reason why." And my answer was, "I've got so much baggage, it's not even funny."
Yeah.
At that moment, Linnea's pregnant. We're still not married. I don't have a job because we just moved to Denver. I can't find a job. And part of my wildness at the end of my senior year, I do some things that my own brother turns me into the police for it.
Oh gosh.
And so I'm on probation 3.5 years, facing a 7-year sentence.
Oh my gosh.
And I, it's just a bunch of silly things that I had done. Silly is the wrong word because it was serious. And so I'm on probation. My girlfriend's pregnant. I don't have a job. And this guy in church goes, "I think you should work with our kids." And so I look at him and I said, "Dude, I've got so much baggage, it's not even funny." And he looks at me and he goes, "You're in the vineyard. Everybody has baggage." And he literally just puts his arm around me and he walks me back to the youth pastor and says, "Hey, here's your new youth leader." And from that day on, I started doing youth ministry. And I did youth ministry from that day without missing any days for 22 years.
This summer, Vineyard USA met in the mountains of North Carolina for our national conference, Making All Things New. If you weren't able to join us in person or you want to listen again to some of the content, we've made a conference resource package with all the main session talks and breakout talks. Extra content, including full versions of interviews with Nikki Gumbel, Dave Ferguson, and Rick Warren, and worship sets. Check it out on the Vineyard USA webpage or the link we have in the show notes.
Again, the hard right turn, right? So I'm doing dishes, hiding from my family because I feel like a loser. I've lost everything. I have all this potential. I've not lived up to it.
No.
I'm disqualified. God starts nudging you, like, is that true? And then next thing you know, you're in a vineyard where you're all of a sudden serving with youth.
And I'm being invited in.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? Like,
yeah, you're not pushing your way in. You're not going, "Hey, I have this call, but can I get involved? How do I do?" It's some guy just spots you.
Yeah. Yeah. And asks us to play. And so Linnea and I started doing youth ministry. I'm 19, she's 17. Remember this. We are the same age as the kids in the youth group. Or at least some of them.
Well, yeah, and this is what it's so interesting for me listening to you because of course this is our job. This is what we do, you and I. And you just, at least for me, I forget the power of an invitation, the power of just looking at somebody and saying, "Hey, have you ever thought about maybe helping out over here?" Or, "Here's something you could do that I think would be really life-giving for you and would really serve these folks." And somehow I think over time in the ministry space, you can get stuck where you're thinking about the sort of widgets that need to be filled or the things that have to do, we need leaders in order to do this and we're going to need volunteers in order to do that. But if you flip it and you go, what does God want to do with this person?
Yeah.
And that you believe fundamentally that when I'm inviting you into something in the life of the church, this is a gift to you. Like if you serve, it's a gift to you.
Yeah.
Because you're going to learn something about God. You're going to learn something about how to give your life away to others. This is a gift to you. It's not just like I think about youth ministry. We just need somebody who can just sort of stand in the room and make sure somebody doesn't hit somebody else or, whatever. This is a real invitation. It's a big deal.
And the relentless pursuit of God on our lives. As a kid, I always there was like this thing that was going on, and then God showed up and goes, no, I called you. And then I'm doing other things, and I've called you. And then I called you. And then when I started doing youth ministry, the guys that are in the room, I was the least of the guys in the room. I mean, the guy that was the youth pastor, there's 3 or 4 guys that, man, he always shows them like, hey, I need you to do this, or hey, I need you to do. And I was kind of there's kind of this space for me is like, maybe do I have my calling different?
Yeah, I can move chairs, I guess. Maybe I can. You need some chairs moved, or like I can set up the snacks. I guess But
I knew that I never was jealous of. I mean, there was a piece of me that was like, well, I would want to be. Like, I would want to be called on, but there's a whole other piece of me that was going, God called me. Like, what else am I going to go do? God called me. And then one by one, those people just went and did something else.
Mm-hmm.
We were all just volunteers. And they just went and did something else and did something else and did something else. And then you look up and you're the guy that's been doing youth ministry for 7 years, volunteering for a church. And everybody else has gone and done something else.
Yep. And by then you're, mid-20s. You're still just working whatever kind of job. What kind of job? What are you doing to make money?
I was an electrician.
Oh, okay. There you go.
So remember, I come from this blue-collar family. And so my dad always told me, he'd say, they can take a piece of paper from you, but they can't take away what you've learned with your hands.
He's not wrong. Yeah,
he's not wrong.
That's true. Yeah, totally.
And so whenever we get married, whenever all this happens, my dad goes, you just need to go get a job with your hands. And my brother-in-law was an electrician, and he got me on with a company that he was working with. And so I started off being an electrician. So my first 7 years of our marriage, I was an electrician. I was just shy of, when I went into ministry full-time, I was scheduled to take my master's, and I had gotten my journeyman's, and I was 2 weeks out, and I was going to get my master's electrical license. Wow. And I got offered a job to work at a church.
Wow, that's so great. And again, like I don't know how to say that. It sounds like I'm diminishing, and I'm not intending to. I mean, all the different ways that people are called to ministry are nearly always really not very glamorous. I mean, for me, I'm waiting tables, working at a call center, using the extra energy to like show up and be at youth group and then lead a small group. Okay. It's like, there's nothing that great about that, honestly. I mean, it's pretty mundane. It was a lot of work. I'm tired pretty much all the time. We're not making any money. And it's like so exciting. Like it's just so fun. Like I'm roaming around with people, praying for folks and in Bible studies and doing stuff. And it's an interesting, I've been reading, I don't know if you've seen Tim Keller's biography.
Yeah.
And you're reading, Tim Keller, this giant of a man, intellectually, church planter, New York City, all the things. And you look at how he's starting ministry, and he's just like fumbling around. He gets a job working for the post office. Yeah. It's like, huh. Yeah. I didn't think that's how that would go. I thought you were going to like leapfrog that part because you're you're Tim Keller. Isn't there a shortcut here somewhere?
The giant of ministry, you're thinking, well, surely you started off in a big way. And no. I used to twist, pull wire and twist wires and
Dude,
put in light
that's hard work, by the way.
But what it did was a lot of times you're working by yourself.
Yeah.
And so all of these times I'm praying and praying and praying, and I'm crying out. I'm like, God, is this what you called me to? Is this what you called me to?
Totally.
And God used that time to develop a longing in my heart for the ministry that he would call me to. And I haven't been an electrician for 30 years.
Yeah.
I use it all the time.
Yeah. I bet you do. Yeah.
I use it all the time. Hey, Paul, Pastor Paul, can you come help me with it? Right? I'm not doing electrical work, just so anybody knows.
Don't call me, right?
Don't call me. But it's just this way that God used that season in my life, because I had a lot of time where I'd work by myself.
Wow.
And I would pray and I would think, and I would, at lunch, I would write sermons in my head down on these yellow pads that I kept. He used it to cultivate a longing for the church.
Yeah.
A longing for ministry.
Yeah. Well, yeah, there's a lot to say about that. I mean, but I guess it's important to know there's somebody right now waiting tables, working for a landscaping company, in the back of a restaurant, pulling wire through a ceiling in some building, and maybe they're like you, where the way they listen to this podcast is while they're, doing other kind of menial work, and they hear this and they're going, I feel like I've got this call. I have this thing in my heart, but how in the world am I doing this? How does this go to that? And you know what? I don't know how. I honestly don't know how. But what I think is worthy to point out, and is it isn't magical in that it's not like one day a church calls you. Here's what you did do. You faithfully showed up, served, volunteered, contributed with the space and the time you had available. You're like, okay, I'm working this job all the time. I'm a young dad, but I can give these 2 nights a week, this part of my weekend, and I'm going to do that. I'm going to give that. That's going to be a part of what I do with my life, is serving in the life of a local church, faithfully trying to do what I know how to do to follow Jesus with the time that I have available to me. That bit is really important. So the amount of people that I talk to say, I think I'd be a missionary. I go, really? So tell me more about that. Well, when I was 7, I had this dream about whatever, somewhere in China. I go, that's incredible. Tell me about how you're cultivating the gifts and the calling on your life. Like, how are you serving in a local church? How are you maybe even learning a language, or, doing the things that would put you in the mix of people that are loving and following Jesus with you? Oh, I don't know what I really think about church, or, but I do go to this cool conference every year, and I listen to this podcast, and I really love this one preacher who, is in New York or North Carolina or wherever. Love their stuff. And I just think like, so you think somehow just magically, that's just gonna happen. So I don't know. It can. The Lord can do whatever he wants.
Yeah.
But that's not generally how it works. It usually works because you're serving in another person's vision in such a way that God then can trust you with the vision. Yeah. That's generally the way I've experienced ministry forming in someone. Is you've got to work through what it looks like to just say, Lord, I'm going to do whatever's in front of me. Do, not just think about, not just desire, not just hope for, but do. Because, Paul, you and I both know, I'm stunned about anyone that we hire to work for us says this, if they've never been in ministry. I'm stunned at how much of what we do is exceptionally mundane.
Oh, man.
emails, following up on that phone call, the random thing at the building that's not working, the sort of bank got mixed up on how they're processing some bit of payroll or something, like the amount of things you do in ministry, especially when you're starting church planting, on staff at a church. If you've not learned the skills to just show up and go to work, like this is a day we're pulling wire. Okay, like there's nothing great about this day.
Nothing great about it. Nothing sexy about it.
But then you get to do the cool things. You also get to be there at a wedding. You also get to be in the moment when someone gives their life to Christ. You also get to be in the hospital when you're watching someone's life fade away and minister to the family. You get to do all those things as well. Yeah. But so much is mundane. And when I think back on how much of the training for me in ministry was like, I'm going to be the best server here at this pizza place. Like, I'm the guy they can count on. I'm going to do my work. I'm going to show up early. When I make a mistake, I'm going to apologize. I'm going to learn. I'm going to be a good team member. That's all training. And then with the time I've left, I'm going to lead a small group that maybe nobody even cares about. I'm going to try and make a few people, help people grow in their life with Jesus. Maybe even multiply a small group or two. Yeah. I'm going to show up and do the youth group game. I'm going to smack somebody in the head with a loaf of bread while they hit me, blindfolded or whatever. I mean, we're going to, it's just random. But it's in all of that, you get cultivated. Something grows inside of you that if you don't have that, it's a pretty rude awakening when you step into ministry.
Well, I one of the things that I'm amazed at, because I didn't have this from the time I was 12, camp, even in the middle of me, like running and hiding by this fire pit, like I never ever wondered, like I always knew that God was calling me to something. Yeah. And that calling did two things. One, it kept me centered. But two, there was a frustration in it because my timing was not God's timing. Yeah. But God was cultivating in all of those storylines and all of those things. And God was teaching me things. He's teaching me about how families work. He's teaching me about ministry and longing and even repentance. Yeah. And that place of all of the things, I was in a denomination that valued college, right? And college is good. I want my kids to go to college. I want my kids to go to college. My wife went to school for 22 years. She graduates with her doctorate. I mean, she's like super who's who school. But there's a whole nother thing that is calling. Mm-hmm. What are you doing? How are you responding to the voice of God? How are you responding to the call of God? How are you submitting to the call of God? And in so much of it, it's mundane. It's mundane. I'm just being faithful with what God's given me to do. And I love that God never stops. I love that Jesus never stops pursuing us. The Holy Spirit never stops pursuing us. I can say this, Jay, but I thank God for the vineyard. Yeah. Because the vineyard in that day, in that time, there's churches, all kinds of churches now that operate differently than they did back in the 80s and 90s. Yeah. But the vineyard was unbelievably a place of acceptance. And it's always been a place of acceptance. It was a place of like, no. It was the first time I walked in and felt the authentic presence of God in a way that I didn't feel was hyped up or blown up. And it was a way that an authentic place of, hey, no, you understand that everybody has some baggage, everybody has some story. Yep. And it said, just start saying yes to Jesus. Yes. And I think that's been probably the most important part, is even in the waywardness at times in my life, was the willingness to still say yes to Jesus. Yeah. in those moments. I know, I'll say yes to you. You know.
Well, and Paul, my experience of you, what I've also seen of your life, there's something about knowing you're called and not necessarily knowing what you are supposed to do, but you just want to be helpful. So, I mean, I think about the roles I've watched you do in the life of growing churches. Mm-hmm. And there's like, I've seen you do about every kind of job there is on a church staff other than lead worship. Maybe you have, but I don't think you've been worship pastor.
No. They won't let me on the stage. They won't let me sing.
Yeah, exactly. But youth and young adults, and then, I guess I'm an executive over here. Obviously, you're a lead pastor. You've helped serving with areas and with church planting and with youth kind of things outside of the church. And then now you're a regional leader. And what's also true, I know, of your story, which we could probably do another hour on, is as many leaders that have helped you develop, there's been a whole bunch that were really hard on you.
Yeah.
Like you've experienced very traumatic, rough church environments where things just did not go well. Like it went sideways. And politics and power and money and influence mixed together in weird ways. But what's amazing to me about you is you are like, well, I don't know. I'm not sure what I can do about that part, but what I can do is continue to be faithful to my life with God, my life with my family. I can continue to discharge the duties of my ministry, even if people are behaving badly around me, moral failures and lying and stealing. And I mean, the amount of things I've watched you navigate. And if people don't know you, I mean, to just be with you, you're fun. You still somehow enjoy being with people. And I guess listening to you now, what I wonder, which I don't know, is how much of that is just some kind of hook got put in you so deeply that it's like, I wish that was different. I wish this leader could have been different. I wish that could have gone better. I wish that could get repaired. And maybe it hasn't. But you know what? This is what I'm going to do. I'm still called to do this. So I guess I'll just keep doing that. And the Lord continues to give you grace and favor. We're in an interesting moment, Paul, where many people are out of the church or out of ministry because that person did that or didn't do that or said this or didn't say that.
Yeah.
So I'm out.
Yeah.
How in the world do you think you've stayed in? Because you've got at least 30 moments that I'm aware of. From just our friendship, hearing your stories, that you could have been like, I think that's enough. I think I'm going to go. I mean, I love the Lord. Maybe even I love the church.
Yeah.
But that's enough. I think that was the 27th really weird thing where I don't know that I can do another rep. How do you think you've stayed in it?
I think you and I were sitting by a fire one night, and you kind of asked me that same question. And it was the first time that I'd really processed how much betrayal, bad behavior.
Yeah.
Because I can sit around, lots, right?
Yeah, and a lot of people in ministry do.
Yeah.
But I think it's really unusual for you. I mean, it's like more than I'm aware, than normal.
Yeah. There's two moments for me. 2 moments for me. The first moment is when I really, 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 really identify with Peter when he was going to walk away from the ministry. And then Jesus called him back. And then he just said, where else would I go? What else would I do? Like, where else would I go? What else would I do?
Yeah.
Like, yes, I told Jesus yes. Like, and Jesus did set a hook in me deeply. There was one other moment, and I was almost out. And I spent a month praying about it. My wife wouldn't give me permission. And finally she gave me permission. And she goes, you need to spend one more night with the Lord on this. This will make me cry. And I went for a walk, and I walked for 2 hours, and just me and God keep talking. And I heard nothing. And that almost feels cruel whenever you're crying out to the Lord and you hear nothing.
Yeah.
It almost feels cruel. And I said, okay, Lord, if you do not give me an answer tonight, I'm out. I'm going to go do something else. And I gave him, like, when I get back home, when I walk through the doors, this will be resolved. And if you say nothing, then I'm saying you're giving me permission. And I hear nothing, nothing, nothing. I step onto my lawn after a 2-hour walk of hearing nothing. And I hear the Lord say, you can quit if you want to, but when you stand before me, I'll still hold you accountable for the call, because I placed it on you.
Woof.
And so there's a space that I'm responsible to the Lord. The Lord called me when I was 12.
Yeah.
The Lord called me. I didn't seek it. I didn't go get a degree in it. I didn't go chase it. I can't tell you any other thing, but the Lord called me to ministry. And so therefore, I'm accountable to him. And I have the option to quit. But that doesn't mean I have the option to be held accountable for it. The Lord will hold me accountable for my calling.
Yeah.
So no matter what happens between me and the day I see him, I'm accountable to him.
Yeah.
And I'm accountable for it. I'm accountable for the calling. It's my job to keep it sacred. It's my job to keep it pure. Not what other people do to me. That's just what happens in the calling.
Yeah.
And what happens in the calling, you can't let happen to the calling.
Yes.
You have to keep the calling sacred. You have to keep your heart pure before the Lord. And you can quit if you want to, but you're still going to be held accountable for the calling.
Yeah. That's a good word. Well, and even just hearing you say the first part, when you know that you've been forgiven so much.
Yeah.
And I think people all know that, but I think some of us maybe know it more than others. Some of us have had to forgive more than others, or deeper than others. Yeah, but also because we know we've been forgiven. I mean, I think about you doing those dishes at Thanksgiving. And so it's a miracle that you get to do what you get to do. You know it. Now, I think all pastors know it, but you really know it. Like, that you had already pulled yourself out of the game in your mind. Yeah. And the Lord put you back in. And so
I wasn't sure how much pain I could continue to endure.
Well, that's the different problem, right? Is like, can I keep, like, am I going to survive in this somehow? And and the Peter story I just read, it's church history. Who knows what's true, what's not true? I mean, people argue about all those things, but the story is, and I love the restoration of Peter. I love that text. And I love John 6, which you talked about, where he kind of says, do you guys just want to leave? But I more recently read about how when there's the massive persecution in Rome, Peter decides to leave because he's like, I'm going to get killed if I hang around here. Like, this is bad. So he's leaving Rome, and he has a distinct vision of Jesus walking past him into Rome.
Wow.
And he hears the Lord say, do you want to follow me?
Yeah.
And this is Peter's moment to get it right. He's gotten it wrong a few times. Yeah. But he's like, I'm going to get it right this time. And he turns around, he goes back into Rome. And of course, he's captured, tried, and crucified.
Yeah.
And you think, I guess what I'm most reminded of when I think about people like Peter, or your story or my story, is the call of ministry is not a call to uninterrupted success.
No.
The call to ministry is a kind of dying that brings a different kind of life that always involves suffering. And it enables us to be the kind of people then that can offer comfort. I just keep referring, I find myself always at that clear text of Paul, we comfort from the comfort we've received.
Yeah.
What you don't think about is that means you have to be in the kind of place to receive comfort.
Yeah.
So I think about the role the Lord has given you grace to do right now. Paul's a regional leader. Like most every person who's going to look at you in your region or across Vineyard and go, man, this is really hard. I don't know if I can do this. Let me tell you what just happened. You're in the unique position of being like, oh yeah, I know that one. Yeah, I know that one. That one you just said, I know that one. Not in a flippant way, but in the no. Like, listen, that's a tough one, but I have some comfort here. I have a way that the Lord has met me that I have confidence He can meet you. So let's walk through that together. Let me give you some ways I think God could be working in you and through you. That's a unique set of gifts. That's a unique call. And I'm really grateful God's equipped you to do that.
As we say this, I know we're getting close to wrapping up, but I'm not going to let the only person that gets to kill the call in me is Jesus.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to let somebody else kill it. You have all these people and you watch them walk away from the ministry. What I'm supposed to do is I'm supposed to die to myself daily, right? I'm supposed to let the Lord kill me daily in the best sort of way, in my selfishness and my issues, I'm supposed to die to that daily. And what I watch other people do is I watch that they let other people kill them. No, I'm not going to let you do that.
Yeah.
I whenever I go through hurtful things, I take it back to the Lord, and then the Lord asks me to die to it, die to my hurts, die to my wounds, and then it's that. Would you say yes again? And truthfully, I'm Hebrews chapter 12 verses 1, 2, and 3 is the passage that says, "But the joy that was set before him."
Yep.
Ministry's joy. Like we don't have to. We get to. We get to do ministry. We get to walk with people in their trials and tribulations. We get to tell people about Jesus. We get to show up in the mundane. This is something that I've said this lately. I prayed to God for the life I have, and to my shame, I complained about the life He gave me.
Yeah.
And He gave me the very life that I prayed about.
Yeah.
And so for me, there's this space that I'm holding sacred anymore. I'm not complaining about the life I have. I have the very life I prayed for. God in His joy gave it to me. And I get to walk with people in ministry. And I get to walk with people in hardship. And I get to go through some of that myself.
Yeah, turns out.
Yeah.
Yeah, it turns out. It's hard to lead people to places you've not been. Yeah. So that's good. Well, Paul, I really appreciate you taking so much time. And I'm really grateful for the way you're serving our movement and doing the work you've done. And yeah, there's a lot ahead of us, but I'm really grateful that guys like you have stuck it out, because we all get to benefit. Thank you.
You and I could talk for hours, and I love you and Danielle, and I love the Vineyard. I love who the Vineyard is, who the Vineyard has been, and I love who the Vineyard is becoming.
Amen. All right. Bless you, man.
The We Are Vineyard podcast is a production from the team at Vineyard USA. If you've been enjoying the podcast, here's a few ways you can help us. Leave us a review on the podcast platform of your choice. This helps more people find us. Connect with us online for additional resources. Our website is vineyardusa.org, and we're on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at VineyardUSA. Thanks for listening. See you next week.